Hi there, welcome to an extremely damp north coast, and we're going to be looking today at our fourth episode in the live blog of Dan Brown's Inferno, which will include chapters 36 through to 52. It's a slightly longer instalment this time because of various train journeys and things, meant that I managed to get through a bit, which is a change. So, remember when we last left off? Langdon and Sienna have now found their way into the Gallery of the 500 somehow without paying, and they are now looking around at various canvases trying to decipher the next clue. And they have just been reported by a janitor for looking quite suspicious. So the action opens up with the janitor coming back with the owner of the gallery, who seems a bit perturbed by the fact that these people are behaving very, very oddly. And she arrives and basically instantly recognises Robert Langdon and says welcome back. Unfortunately, Langdon is still suffering from amnesia, so has no idea who she is, but it transpires that he was in this precise same gallery the previous night with an associate called Ignacio. And supposedly they are both taken up to the museum upstairs to view Dante's death mask, which obviously would then appear to be the next clue. So up they go to try and see death mask, to try and find out what's happening. And Langdon sort of explains that Dr. Sienna is his sister in yet more odd ways of doing things. Why he couldn't just say she was a colleague is beyond me, but they're going to go up and they're going to see the mask. They arrive at the cabinet and lo and behold the mask is gone. They get taken into a side room in which they all watch the security tape from the previous night, in which the curator, Ignacio and Langdon all come in together into the room. They start looking at the mask. The curator leaves for a laboratory break and Langdon and Ignacio take the mask out of the cupboard. They hold it up to the light like this so they can look through it, and they clearly see something, and Ignacio steals the mask. So, proprietor finds this, is rather annoyed, and so she decides to call the police, because obviously Langdon has stolen the death mask of Dante. She then tries to call up Ignacio to find out, what he's doing and where the mask is, and she gets his secretary, who says rather conveniently last night Ignacio has been killed, but she asks to speak directly to Robert Langdon, and she plays him a rather conveniently recorded last message, which has come from Ignacio, that basically says that the answer he seeks lies in what he assumes to be Canto 25 of Dante's Paradise, and that the gates are open. So Langdon has to now try and decipher this, while at the same time the police are on their way. Both Langdon and Sienna now come clean with the curator, explaining to her exactly why they're there and that they are not brother and sister, and that Langdon has amnesia and cannot recall for the life of him what he will have done with this mask, but he has to let go free so he can find it. The curator seems a bit suspicious about this, but eventually Langdon and Sienna cause a distraction and they run off. Now, at the same time of this, there are two other stories playing out. You've still got the army, who are desperately trying to find Langdon, but they're obviously still over at the Bowler Gardens, and no one realises that this call being put in from the museum is actually linked to that. But it so happens that Biantha, the assassin, is on the Ponte Vecchio still, and she overhears this message, and she realises that clearly this has something to do with Langdon, so she sets off and also enters Gallery 500, again without paying, but let's not get bogged down that again. And what then basically happens is the army finally twigs that that's where Langdon is, they send all their forces across, and suddenly everyone comes together in the museum and Langdon has to now try and escape with Sienna. They find a hidden door within a room full of maps, which it just so happens that Langdon, as always is to happen, was there previously a few years ago and was shown all these hidden passages, so he knows where it is. They dash through the hidden passageway. They sort of follow one route. The army also finds it and dashes through, but they follow a different route. And so now Langdon and Sienna are in the roof above the main gallery, and they have to try and now basically crawl from strut to strut to try and get across the roof and down via a secret stairway exit. They get about halfway across, and Langdon unfortunately knocks a plank off from between two of the stanchions in the roof, and it hits the canvas below, which alerts Viantha, who's down below, that that's where Langdon is, and up she sprints. She arrives there and basically confronts Langdon and says, I'm here to try and help you. Whether she is not, we don't really know, but she's saying that she's there to help her, but Sienna creeps up behind her, they have an altercation, and Viantha falls off the platform, down through a canvas, into the Gallery 500, and she's obviously now very dead. And Langdon and Sienna then run off together and escape. They leave through a small back door, and just prior to leaving the back door, Sienna decides that she needs them to be disguised, and so what she does is she takes off her hair and reveals that she is bald, and therefore she says, we'll look a lot better if I go out like this and you put on my wig, and therefore no one will know who we are. Because they have to now go out into Florence and try and find a copy of Paradise so they can actually find out what the 25th canto actually is. They are watched leaving this side entrance by another one of these sort of strange characters Dan Brown creates. This time it's a gentleman with a rather bad skin condition and dark glasses, who is not particularly fit, and he basically tries to follow Langdon and Sienna, who go off first of all to a Dante museum to try and find a copy of the text. That's closed, therefore they have to try and now find somewhere else. They decide that the place to go will be a church where Dante specialists meet, and so off they go to meet there. In parallel with this, we're starting to finally also discover a little bit about the villain of the piece and what's actually happening. We had been given slight hints earlier on. This was all going to be to do with the Earth being too populous, and there may be having to be a drastic solution in which populations get culled, and that's now... So we now learn who it was who, in the preface, led to his death. It was a renowned scientist who'd become a bit of a laughingstock of late because he'd started making assumptions around and declarations to say that basically populations were out of control and we needed to cull at least half the humans on the Earth in order that we did not become extinct. So we now know who he is, and we also understand that he was the person that the provost and the lot on the boat were trying to protect earlier on, and he's also the one that's made this film that has to get uploaded in 2 days' time onto the web to terrify the world. We also then learn the fact that the provost and his consortium have basically been employed by the scientists to keep him hidden and secure, and they'd obviously failed that because Dr. Sinsky, with the grey hair, who apparently is one of Dan Brown's very attractive female leads, somehow she's tracked him down. We also now know that she is the head of the World Health people, and that she knows what he plans to do, or at least she has an inkling of what he plans to do, and she was trying to stop him. The job of the provost and all those was to try and keep his location secure, which they failed to do because obviously she found him, and he's then gone and killed himself. So we've got now an awful lot of loose ends. We're a good, probably halfway through the book now, so we're starting to find out a bit more about exactly what it is that's happening here. I'll say for one, there were in this section, because it's a lot more action-based rather than Langdon sitting around looking at paintings, there are fewer factual inaccuracies than there were in the last part, because the last part was an awful lot about the background of Florence and where they are and what happens in these various places. The problem is, once you get away from getting annoyed over the factual inaccuracies, you end up getting more and more annoyed over the fact that basically the plot just is no longer making an awful lot of sense. I mean, for a start, why does it always seem that these little trails Langdon has to go on always seem to focus on places that he's been to very recently and been shown round all the secret backways of? Even more strange, I found, was the fact that he's had this message from Ignacio, which tells him that the solution to his next riddle is going to lie in the 25th canto, supposedly, of Paradise from Divine Comedy. So, what Langdon basically has to now do is go out into Florence and try and find a copy of the Divine Comedy. That should not be a particularly difficult thing to do. Most of us would generally either go off and find an internet cafe or a bookshop or a museum or something that happens to have a copy of the Divine Comedy. For some reason, Robert Langdon, the well-known Harvard genius, rather than do these things, he decides to go off to an obscure, little-known Dante museum. When he's asked why they're there, he explains that he knows for a fact that the gift shop within this museum happens to sell large posters that contain the entire of the Divine Comedy in minuscule writing. Now, my sort of query would be this: why on earth would you want to, when you need desperately to find that canto, why would your first thought be, let's go somewhere where there's a gift shop that sells posters in tiny writing that we can then try and look at? Why not just go to a bookshop and buy a copy of it? Why not just go online and search for it? You can find it in seconds. I've tried. And it's that kind of thing that, as usual, sort of leads you towards thinking this is a really, really stupid book. Also, when they're leaving the gallery originally, as I say, Sienna admits that she's bald because she needs to get them out to try and get them somewhere secure, and they must disguise their identities. I would suggest, if you were looking to blend into a crowd, you're going to do an awful better job of that as just a tall, dark-haired man and a blonde-haired woman than you are as a bald woman and a strange man, tall man, in an exceptionally large blonde wig. It seems to me that would be completely counterproductive, because all you're going to end up doing is basically just making yourselves more conspicuous as opposed to less. It just is a really, really bizarre thing to try and do. Whether obviously it's a device to try and end up with Sienna being bald, and presumably, as with all Dan Brown's heroines, there'll be something later on in which she's been touched by divinity or some kind of rubbish like that. But ultimately, it just goes to show even more that for a thriller, this really, Dan Brown's novels are supposed to be not particularly plausible, but they are supposed to be at least followable. It seems to me to make absolutely no sense that you've got two people who supposedly have this humongous combined IQ, and yet they make such utterly stupid points of view. Part of me says the entire reason that section exists is purely so Dan Brown can boast about the fact that he knows that museums in Florence close on Mondays, and that there is a Dante museum that happens to have a gift shop that sells tiny print copies of the Divine Comedy. It just doesn't seem to me that would be the most logical way of going forward to try and solve that riddle. And also his reason given as to why some of the Florentine shops and things close on Mondays, supposedly his excuse is they changed the Sabbath round to basically interfere less with their bottom line. That is absolute rubbish. That's not at all what it's to do with, because there are plenty of museums and galleries that are open on Mondays. They tend to alternate round so that they're not all closed on the same day. That's the reason why they do it. It's nothing to do with them having got together and felt that Sunday was, as a bottom line, less important. There's also a section in which he talks about the conflict between Apollo and Dionysus, and saying that that is evidence that even the gods were conflicted. Well, no, it's not, because the point is those two are both different gods. The fact is that we're supposed to all have within ourselves elements of both Apollo and Dionysus, the head and the heart. It's not, they were one god. It's not saying the gods were conflicted, because they weren't. The fact was that both of those two gods were completely unconflicted. They had their own opinions, but the fact is that we take elements from each of them inside ourselves, and that's what causes our internal conflict. And it's this kind of thing that tends to get me really, really wound up over Dan Brown. So like I said, we have thankfully crossed the midway point of the book now. We're over halfway through. It's still utter bilge. It's absolute rubbish. He's still continuing with his utterly bizarre plot points, in the fact that they seem to be constantly walking through the entire of Florence, not paying a penny for anything at all. I mean, more to the point, if genuinely Robert Langdon does want to go and try and find this copy of the Divine Comedy from a museum, that museum costs, I believe, between €4 and €6 to get into. So they're basically going to be paying €12, ideally, to get into a museum. They don't look around, just so they can get to a gift shop and buy a poster with minuscule print of the Divine Comedy in its entirety. It's just a really, really stupid thing to have done, and it's absolutely symbolic of just how bad Dan Brown's writing and plotting really are, and why on earth we haven't got one of the editors saying, "Look, Dan, seriously, this section makes no sense. Nobody in their right mind would do this. You would simply go and find whatever their local version of Waterstones is and buy a copy. Or you'd find an internet cafe and get online and you'd read what the cancer wasn't printed off." It's stupid. But, I mean, we'll see where it goes to from here. I mean, for all its faults, the central theory, for once, is actually quite an interesting one. Because the whole idea of overpopulation, and is there a solution that involves basic mass genocide, and would that actually benefit society as a whole because it prevents our extinction? That's essentially a very interesting theme. Certainly it's a more interesting theme than we ever had in Angels and Demons, Vinci Code, or Lost Symbol. But it just doesn't seem to be really fitting a decent plot around it, and certainly the elements of the plot are at best fanciful. So we'll carry on, and I'll see you in another 50 odd pages time, and we'll see what we've got to from there. But let's just say so far I'm less than impressed, and I'll see you soon. Ta-ra.